Buckingham Palace, 1953. A throne inherited in sorrow. For Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mother, grief was an uninvited guest who wouldn't leave. Then, a forbidden offer, a voice from the other side. A secret meeting that could change everything, or shatter their remaining peace. Was it a genuine connection to the beloved king, or a cruel deception preying on their deepest pain? Based on real events, unveil a royal secret. Shadows of the past in Buckingham Palace. A year had passed since King George VI had left this world, leaving behind a silence that seemed louder than any royal reception. In one of the cozy salons where once his laughter had echoed, a heavy atmosphere now reigned. The thick velvet curtains barely allowed the pale winter light to seep through, and though the fire burned in the hearth, it could not chase away the cold that had settled in their hearts. Elizabeth, now queen, sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the garden, where the bare trees stood like symbols of loss. In her hands, she held a photograph of her father, the very one taken at Sandringham, where he smiled despite the illness that had already begun to sap his strength. The door creaked open softly, and the Queen Mother entered the room. Her face, usually so composed and full of warmth, was pale, her eyes heavy with sorrow. She approached her daughter and sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lilibet," she murmured, "you are looking at that photograph again." Elizabeth started, as though roused from deep contemplation. She turned to her mother and attempted a smile, but it faltered on her lips. "Yes, Mama. Sometimes it feels as though if I look long enough, he will speak to me again." Her voice wavered and she lowered her gaze. "I miss him so much." The Queen Mother closed her eyes, willing back the tears. She knew she had to be strong, for her daughter, for the country. But in that moment, her heart was breaking. "I do too, my dear. Every morning, for a brief instant, I forget that he is gone. And then—" She fell silent, clenching her hands into fists. "Then I remember, and it feels like a knife to the heart." Elizabeth placed her hand over her mother's, their fingers intertwined, as if they were holding on to each other to stay afloat in this sea of grief. "We must be strong, Mama. Papa would have wanted us to go on, but sometimes—" She hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Sometimes I feel so terribly alone, even with Philip, even with the children. Without him, everything feels so empty." The Queen Mother nodded, her eyes brimming with the tears she fought so hard to suppress. "I know, Lilibet. I try to be strong too, but sometimes I just want to hear his voice again. I want him to tell me that everything will be all right." "We will endure, Mama, we must, for him, for everyone." Yet deep within, they both knew that neither of them was truly ready to let him go. And in the stillness, within the walls of the palace that had once been filled with his presence, they remained together, holding each other's hands, seeking solace in the memory of the man they had so dearly loved. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more about forgotten destinies and royal intrigues, subscribe. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. The Infinity of Emptiness. When the Queen Mother left the salon, Elizabeth remained alone. The silence that had once seemed comforting now pressed down on her like a heavy shroud. She approached the fireplace where the flames crackled and flickered, struggling to warm the room, but their heat never reached her heart. She looked at the photograph of her father, still clutched in her hands. His eyes, so kind and wise, seemed to gaze directly at her. She remembered how he had taught her to be strong, how he had told her that the crown was not just a privilege, but a burden. But he had never told her how heavy that burden would be to bear without him. "Papa," she whispered, "how am I to go on without you?" Her voice trembled, and she closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. But they came anyway, silent and bitter, like the rain outside her window. She sank into a chair, feeling once again the crushing weight of loss settle upon her. A year. A whole year had passed since he was gone. But to her, time felt like both a fleeting moment and an eternity. Sometimes it seemed as though he was still here, within these walls, that at any moment he would walk into the room with that familiar gentle smile and say, "Lilibet, you will manage." But then reality would strike again. He was gone, and the emptiness that followed that realization was unbearable. "How much longer?" she asked softly, speaking to the void. "How much more of this endlessness?" She felt fear creeping toward her like a shadow, fear of the future, of the long years ahead without him, fear that this emptiness would never fade, that it would remain with her forever. Elizabeth stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain fell steadily, the droplets tapping against the sill as if trying to reach her. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling its chill seep into her skin. "I must be strong," she told herself. "For Mama, for Philip, for everyone." But then she hesitated, her reflection staring back at her with quiet anguish. But how does one remain strong when the emptiness inside is so vast? She closed her eyes, feeling the tears rise once more, but this time she did not resist them. She allowed herself to weep, knowing that tomorrow she would wear the mask again, the mask of the queen, of strength, of certainty. But for now, in this stillness, she was simply Lilibet, a girl who missed her father. A dinner of shadows and the whisper of hope. The dining room, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, seemed an island of warmth amidst the cold vastness of the palace, where every corner held echoes of past grandeur. Around the long table sat only a few: Queen Elizabeth, her husband Philip, the Queen Mother, and their guest, Lionel Logue, an old family friend whose name was forever etched into history for his remarkable work with the late King George VI. This unassuming Australian with his keen eyes and easy smile had once helped George find his voice, overcoming both his stammer and his fear of public speaking, a feat that was spoken of in the family with gratitude and reverence. Tonight's dinner was quiet, almost intimate, yet the air was heavy with unspoken sorrow. The servants moved soundlessly along the walls, serving dishes with practiced elegance, while silver cutlery clinked gently against porcelain in the rhythm of occasional words. Elizabeth, seated at the head of the table, absent-mindedly traced patterns on her plate with her fork, her thoughts drifting far away. Opposite her, the Queen Mother tried to maintain a conversation, but her voice trembled, betraying her inner fragility. Lionel Logue, seated to the Queen Mother's right, with the candid warmth that had long defined him, decided to break the oppressive silence. "You know, Your Majesty," he began, offering the Queen Mother a slight bow of his head. "This soup reminds me of the evenings in Sandringham. I remember once George said to me, 'Lionel, if I ever stop stammering, it will only be so that I may thank you for your patience.'" He chuckled, his eyes gleaming with the warmth of remembrance. The Queen Mother gave a faint smile, but a shadow passed over her face. "Yes, he knew how to cherish his friends," she replied softly, lowering her gaze to her glass. "Now I regret that I did not cherish every day with him as I should have." Philip, sitting across from her, leaned back in his chair and cast a quick glance at Elizabeth, as if gauging her reaction to the conversation. Then he turned to Logue. "You were more than just a physician to him, Lionel. He called you the man who restored my crown," Philip said with a touch of wry humor, though his tone held genuine sincerity. Logue nodded, accepting the compliment with grace, but his expression grew suddenly serious. He set down his fork and, lowering his voice as if about to reveal a secret, looked directly at the Queen Mother. "I understand what you are feeling right now, Your Majesty," he said gently. "After my myrtle passed 2 years ago, I felt like a ship without a rudder. The emptiness, it does not let go, does it? But you know, I found a way to hear her again." Elizabeth lifted her gaze from her plate, showing interest for the first time that evening. The Queen Mother leaned forward slightly, her fingers tightening around her napkin. "To hear?" she repeated, her her voice carrying both hope and skepticism. "What do you mean, Lionel?" Logue smiled, but there was something enigmatic, almost theatrical in the way he did it. "There is a woman," he began, lowering his voice to a whisper as though afraid the very walls of the palace might eavesdrop. "Lillian Bailey. She is, how shall I put it, a bridge between us and those who have departed. I met her after Myrtle's death, and she—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She gave me her voice. Not literally, of course, but through her, I felt Myrtle was still near." Philip frowned, his skepticism plain to see. "You're talking about spiritualism?" he asked sharply. "What is this, some fortune teller with a crystal ball?" Logue laughed, dismissing the notion with a wave of his hand. "Oh, Philip, you are far too practical for this world. There is no crystal ball, only her and her gift. I was a skeptic myself, but when she spoke in Myrtle's name, of things only my wife could have known, I believed. And after George's passing," he turned to the Queen Mother with sympathy, "I thought that perhaps she might help you as well." Elizabeth, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You think she could contact my father?" she asked, and in her eyes flickered a mixture of hope and fear. Logue nodded without hesitation. "I believe she can, Your Majesty. She is not some street corner fraud. She comes recommended by people I trust, and her gift, it is real. I have seen it with my own eyes." The Queen Mother clasped her napkin in her hands, her expression shifting as if a faint light had just been kindled within her. "To hear him again," she murmured, almost to herself, "even for a moment." Philip scoffed but held his tongue, noticing the exchanged glance between Elizabeth and her mother. In their eyes he saw something he could not easily dismiss, longing, too deep to be silenced by reason alone. "Well," he said at last, shrugging, "if this gives you peace, I won't object, but I'd keep my wallet far away from this Lillian Bailey." Logue chuckled, raising his glass. "Oh, don't worry, Philip. She's not the type to pocket the silverware. But if you decide to meet her, I promise, it will be a night you will never forget." Dinner continued, but a new note had entered the air, a thin, trembling string of hope, interwoven with the foreboding of something yet unknown. Lillian Bailey, her name, spoken almost by chance, had already begun to weave its invisible threads around the royal family. Doubts and hopes. Elizabeth's study was bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp. Outside, night had already settled over London, and only the distant city lights flickered faintly. The Queen sat at her writing desk, her gaze fixed on the photograph of her father in its silver frame. Her fingers traced the edge of the picture, as if trying to touch him through it. Lionel Logue's words echoed in her mind. "I was able to speak with my wife, and it made things easier." These words circled her thoughts like a haunting melody. She wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that her father, her dear papa, was still somewhere close. That he could hear her. That he could say something, anything, that would help her navigate the vast emptiness his absence had left behind. But with hope came doubt. What if it was all a trick? What if she allowed herself to believe in an illusion, only to find out it was nothing more than the performance of a charlatan? She clenched her hands into fists, feeling the quickening of her heartbeat. "Lilibet?" Philip's voice came from the doorway. He stood on the threshold, concern flickering in his sharp gaze. "You're still awake?" She startled slightly and turned to face him, attempting a smile. "No, I was just thinking." Philip stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind him. He crossed the room and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "About what?" he asked gently. Elizabeth sighed and looked back at the photograph. "About Papa, about Mama, about what Logue said at dinner tonight." She hesitated for a moment, then, choosing her words carefully, added, "Philip, do you believe that the dead can speak to us?" Philip frowned. He had always been a pragmatic man, skeptical of anything that defied logic. But now, as he looked at his wife, he saw not just hope in her eyes, but pain, deep, unrelenting pain, a pain he could not ease. "I don't know, Lilibet," he admitted honestly, "but I know that you and your mother are suffering, and if this could help you find some peace." Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Do you think it's foolish?" she whispered. Philip shook his head. "No, I think you're searching for a way to bear this loss. And if this medium, if she truly has a gift, then why not give it a chance?" Elizabeth lowered her gaze, her heart tightening in her chest. "But what if it's a trick? What if she's only taking advantage of our grief?" Philip leaned forward and took her hands in his. "Then I'll be there with you. If this Lillian Bailey is such a miracle worker, let her prove it to me. I'll watch her every move. And if she so much as tries to take a farthing from you or plays on your emotions, I swear I'll expose her faster than you can say, 'God save the Queen.'" Elizabeth smiled, genuinely for the first time that evening. She stepped closer and rested her hand against his chest. "Thank you, Philip," she said softly. "I knew you would stand by me, even if you don't believe." He let out a dry chuckle, covering her hand with his own. "I believe in you, Lilibet. As for everything else, we shall see. But be warned, if she starts waving around bed sheets and howling like a ghost, I won't be able to keep a straight face." Elizabeth laughed, quietly but with true warmth, and for a brief moment that sound dispelled the shadows gathering around her. Philip pulled her into an embrace, and they stood there for a few moments until the silence of the room became comforting rather than oppressive. "So, it's decided?" he asked, drawing back slightly. Elizabeth nodded. "It's decided. We will try." The secret decision. The Queen Mother's sitting room was warm and inviting, yet today it carried an air of tension. Elizabeth sat across from her mother, their cups of tea growing cold on the table, untouched. Both women sat in silence, lost in thought, yet bound by the same longing, to hear the voice of the one they had loved and lost. It was the Queen Mother who broke the silence first. She looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with both worry and hope. "Lilibet," she began softly, "have you thought about what Lionel said?" Elizabeth nodded, her fingers nervously tracing the hem of her dress. "Yes, Mama, I've thought about it, and I want to try, but only if you agree." The Queen Mother closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing the depth of her emotions. When she opened them again, they held a quiet but unshakable determination. "I do," she whispered. "I want to hear his voice. I want to know that he is happy wherever he is now." Elizabeth felt her heart tighten. She reached out and took her mother's hand in her own. "Then it's decided," she said firmly. "We will hold this séance. But, Mama, no one must know. Not the servants, not the court, not the press. If even a whisper of this gets out, we'll be ridiculed. Or worse, accused of weakness. This must remain our secret." The Queen Mother frowned, her gaze sharpening like that of a woman who had spent her life shielding her family from prying eyes. "You're right," she agreed. "The royal family cannot afford such rumors, but how will we arrange it? This Lillian Bailey, what if she realizes who we are and starts talking?" Elizabeth pondered for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of the sofa. Then suddenly, her expression brightened with an idea. "She must not know who her clients are," she said decisively. "We will arrange it so that she arrives at a house where we are not expected. Not here, not in the palace, somewhere in Kensington with one of our trusted friends. She will be brought there blindfolded if necessary. Let her believe she is meeting an ordinary family grieving a lost loved one. That way we will know whether her gift is real or merely a clever deception." The Queen Mother narrowed her eyes slightly, assessing her daughter's plan, then nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "Let it be so. But Lilibet—" She hesitated, looking her daughter straight in the eye. "If this works, if we hear him, what will we say?" Elizabeth fell silent, her gaze dropping to the photograph of her father. The question hung in the air, heavy and piercing, like the tolling of Westminster's bells. At last, she answered in a near whisper, "I will tell him that I love him, and that I miss him so much." The Queen Mother nodded, her eyes shimmering with tears she no longer tried to hide. "And I will tell him that he was everything to me," she murmured, "and that I am waiting for the day when I will see him again." They sat like that for a moment longer, bound by an unspoken vow, as the wind outside chased the clouds across the sky, foretelling the storm that awaited them. The decision was made, and now all that remained was to step into the unknown, placing their trust in a woman whose name had already begun weaving itself into their fate like a dark thread in an intricate tapestry. The Lady in the Blindfold. Lillian Bailey sat in the back seat of a black limousine, her eyes tightly covered by a silk blindfold. She could feel the car gliding smoothly through the streets of London, but where exactly she was being taken, she did not know. It was part of the conditions, no visual cues, no clues as to her destination. She was used to such requirements. Over the years, she had encountered all kinds of clients, from hardened skeptics to those desperately seeking comfort. And she had always adapted to their expectations, even if it meant traveling into the unknown with her sight taken from her. Her thoughts drifted back to the day when an elegantly dressed woman had approached her, asking if she would conduct a séance for a group of VIPs in London. Lillian had known at once that this was no ordinary request. "I will do it," she had replied to the stranger, her voice low, tinged with the faint lilt of her Cardiff roots. "But if they seek a miracle, they must be ready for one to appear." And now, here she was. The limousine came to a smooth halt, the door opened, and a firm yet courteous hand helped her out. The blindfold remained in place, and Lillian smirked inwardly. How theatrical, she thought. Her footsteps echoed against stone pavement, then softened as she stepped onto a plush carpet. She was being led inside a house, its location unknown to her. The air carried the scent of aged wood and candle wax, and somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked steadily, measuring the moments before the inevitable. Lillian was not afraid of high society, and yet as she was guided down the corridor, she felt a faint tremor of anticipation. Who are these people who go to such lengths to hide their faces? She wondered. What have they lost that would drive them to such secrecy? Waiting in the twilight. The private house in Kensington was steeped in silence. Heavy curtains blocked every glimmer of light from the street, leaving the flickering candles arranged around the round table as the only source of illumination. Their flames wavered, casting restless shadows along the walls, weaving an atmosphere that was both intimate and unsettling. Queen Elizabeth II sat near the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed upon some distant point in the void. She appeared calm, almost motionless, yet the way her fingers clutched at the edge of her sleeve betrayed the tension coiled within her. Beside her sat the Queen Mother. Her face, usually so resolute, now shone with a faint, almost childlike hope, and her eyes glistened in the candlelight, as though she could already see the shadow of George VI before her. Prince Philip stood by the window, parting the curtain slightly to cast a glance at the street where the limousine was expected to arrive. His posture was rigid, his bearing as disciplined as ever, yet there was a tautness in his movements, a controlled unease he made no effort to voice. At the far end of the room sat Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, and her daughter, Princess Alexandra. Marina, whose reserved elegance could not conceal the depth of her sorrow, clutched a handkerchief between her fingers, her eyes fixed upon the table, though her mind was clearly elsewhere. Alexandra, young and fragile, sat close to her mother, her wide eyes following every movement in the room. It had been only a few nights ago, during an otherwise quiet supper, that Marina had spoken of her desire, softly, hesitantly, almost as an afterthought. Perhaps I could speak with George. Perhaps he could tell me something about that day, about the crash. I still do not understand how it happened. She had whispered this to Elizabeth, and the Queen, moved by her plea, had been unable to refuse. Philip, however, remained unconvinced. He was not a man who indulged in matters of the occult, yet for Elizabeth's sake, and for her mother's, He had agreed to be present. His voice, when he finally spoke, was even, though laced with the faintest trace of skepticism. "Ladies, I understand your feelings, but let us maintain our composure. We must not guide the medium or allow emotions to take control. This is crucial if we are to preserve the integrity of this experiment." Elizabeth, seated beside him, nodded. Her expression was composed, yet her eyes betrayed an inner struggle. "Philip is right," she murmured. "We must be careful, but—" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the candle in front of her. "I want to believe that tonight we will hear him. Papa." The Queen Mother looked at her daughter, her eyes shimmering with unspoken grief. "For me, this is the last hope," she whispered. "I want so much to hear his voice again." A hush fell over the room, thick and weighty. Each of them sat immersed in their own thoughts, waiting for the moment of revelation. For Elizabeth, it was a battle between doubt and longing. For the Queen Mother, the final chance at peace. For Marina, the possibility of answers to questions that had tormented her for years. And for Philip, it was a trial, one he was willing to endure for the sake of his family. Voices beyond the veil. Suddenly the door opened, and a tall woman entered with a measured, assured stride. Lillian Bailey. Her arrival shattered the silence, and all eyes turned to her. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and steady. The blindfold remained over her eyes as two silent men, trusted attendants, sworn to secrecy, guided her to the chair at the head of the table. She sat with effortless grace, as though she already perceived everything concealed within the shadows. The royal family, holding their breath, took their places around the table. Elizabeth beside Philip, the Queen Mother directly across from Lillian, Marina, and Alexandra to her left. Their hands rested lightly upon the polished wood, fingertips barely grazing one another as the ritual required. For a moment, Lillian remained still, listening. She thought she caught the faint rustling of skirts, the soft creak of wooden floorboards, subtle hints of life stirring in the dimly lit room, though her eyes could not see them. She took a deep breath, feeling her consciousness begin to slip into a trance. It was a familiar state, as if her mind was drifting across a dark ocean, where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. She sensed the presence of her spirit guides. The first to appear, as always, was Captain William Hedley Wooten. His energy was strong, assured. He was her guide, her link to the world of spirits. "William," she addressed him in her thoughts, "tonight we must help those who are here. They are searching for their loved ones." Her lips moved, and a voice, low and deliberate, resonated through the stillness. "I am William Hedley Wooten, Captain of the Grenadier Guards. I have come to open the way. Speak the names of those you seek." Elizabeth flinched, her fingers tightening around Philip's hand. Philip frowned but said nothing, his gaze fixed upon Lillian. The Queen Mother leaned forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "George," Marina added, in a whisper so soft it barely reached the air. "And George—" Wooten did not reply with words, but she felt his agreement. Then her body trembled slightly, and she sensed her vocal cords beginning to vibrate. It was the sign. The spirit was ready to speak through her. Lillian stilled. Her breathing grew deeper, slower, as if she were descending into a bottomless well. Then her body shuddered slightly, and her voice changed. It became soft, familiar, touched with the gentle rasp that had so often resounded in Sandringham. It was the voice of George VI. "My dear," he began, and the Queen Mother gasped, her hands trembling upon the table. "You still wear the pearls I gave you in 40. I see you even from here." Tears flooded the Queen Mother's eyes as she clutched the pearl necklace around her throat. "George, is it you?" she whispered, her voice breaking with a mix of wonder and grief. "Tell me that all is well." "All is well, my love," the voice through Lillian answered. "I am proud of our girl. Lilibet, are you listening?" Elizabeth, whose composure had until now been her armor, faltered. Her eyes widened and she nodded, unable to form words. "Yes, Papa," she finally managed. "I am here." "You are stronger than you think," the voice continued. "I always knew the crown would rest well upon you. Do not be afraid. I am with you. Always." Philip squeezed her hand tighter, his skepticism wavering in the face of the undeniable power of these words. He cast a glance at Lillian, searching for even the slightest hint of deception, but her face remained motionless, like a mask. Then the voice changed once more. It grew deeper, laced with weariness and a sorrow barely concealed. It was the Duke of Kent. "Marina, Alexandra," he spoke, and Marina froze, her handkerchief slipping onto the table. "That night, in Caithness, I never wanted to leave you. The plane, it should not have fallen. It was a mistake, nothing more. But I watch over you from above, my girls." Alexandra let out a quiet sob, pressing herself closer to her mother. "Papa," she whispered, "why didn't you come back?" "I could not," the voice replied, "but I am here. I will always be here." The room filled with a mixture of reverence and unease. The Queen Mother, her tears flowing freely, gazed at Lillian with such awe that it seemed she beheld an angel. Elizabeth, still struggling within herself, whispered, "Papa, I love you!" "And I love you, Lilibet," the voice answered, before fading into silence. The séance continued for a few more minutes. The spirits conveyed messages, each filled with love and solace. The Queen Mother, Elizabeth, Marina, they had all received what they had sought. Even Philip, despite his doubts, could not deny that what had transpired was remarkable. Lillian slowly straightened, her breathing steadying. The trance receded. One of the attendants approached, and at Philip's nod, removed the blindfold from her eyes. She blinked, adjusting to the light, and only then did she see the faces before her. Her gaze moved from Elizabeth to the Queen Mother, to Marina and Alexandra, and finally to Philip, whose eyes still searched for the trick. She recognized them. Who would not? But she did not waver. "Your Majesty," she began softly. But the Queen Mother interrupted her, rising abruptly from her chair. Her movements were sudden, almost feverish. She unfastened a golden brooch from her gown, an elegant piece adorned with pearls and sapphires, and extended it toward Lillian. "I would like you to have this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You have given me more than I ever dared to hope for. Thank you." Lillian took the brooch, her fingers closing around it in quiet astonishment. I don't know what to say. This is an honor." Elizabeth also stepped forward, her expression solemn. "You must keep this a secret," she said. "No one must know." Lillian nodded. "I swear," she said, looking into the Queen Mother's eyes before letting her gaze sweep over the others. "This night will remain a secret. I will tell no one, not even on my deathbed. This is my promise to you." Elizabeth nodded, her face pale but composed. Philip huffed but remained silent. Even he could not deny the gravity of what had just occurred. Marina and Alexandra sat, holding each other, their tears quiet, yet filled with relief. Lillian rose, her tall figure casting a long shadow. She knew that this night would remain one of the most extraordinary and most secret of her life. And until her death in 1971, she kept her word, taking the Windsor family's secret with her to the grave. Echo of doubt. Buckingham Palace, a few days after the Séance, 1953. Night had long since settled over London, and silence reigned in Elizabeth's private chambers, broken only by the occasional crackling of embers in the fireplace. The Queen sat by the window, wrapped in a warm robe, her gaze drifting over the darkened garden beyond the glass. In her hands, she held an old photograph of her father, the very one taken in Sandringham, where he smiled despite the illness that had already begun to wear him down. Her thoughts kept returning to that night in Kensington, to the voice that had spoken through Lillian Bailey. "You are stronger than you think, Lilibet. I am always with you." The words echoed in her heart, but now, with her emotions settled, their sweetness was tinged with the bitterness of doubt. The door creaked softly, and Philip entered the room. His steps were light yet assured, those of a man who knew an uneasy conversation awaited him. He stopped by the fireplace, leaning against the mantel, and cast a glance at his wife. Her thoughtful face, illuminated by the soft glow of the fire, told him she was still there, in that room, among the shadows and voices. "You're not asleep," he remarked, his voice gentle but carrying its usual note of irony. "Still thinking about that woman?" Elizabeth raised her eyes and gave a faint smile. "Yes, Philip," she admitted, setting the photograph on the side table. "I keep replaying it in my mind. That voice, his words. It sounded so much like Papa. But then I ask myself, what if it was just a performance? A clever deception, as you said?" Philip nodded, stepping away from the fireplace and taking a seat across from her. He crossed his arms, his expression growing more serious. "Lilibet, I don't want to take away your hope," he began carefully, choosing his words with precision. "But you know I had my doubts from the start, and the more I think about it, the more cracks I see in this so-called miracle." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Do you remember how it started? That Wooten fellow, her spirit guide. Everything was so smooth, so convenient. A soldier with a full name and address, almost as if lifted straight from a play. And then your father's voice, he said exactly what you wanted to hear. Too perfect, wouldn't you say?" Elizabeth frowned, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her chair. "But he mentioned the pearls," she countered quietly. "The ones Papa gave Mama in 1940. How could she have known about that?" Philip shrugged, but his tone remained firm. "How? Perhaps Lionel let something slip. He was the one who recommended her to your mother after all. Or she gleaned it from conversations with other clients. Mediums like her are experts at gathering crumbs and turning them into revelations. Or maybe..." He lowered his voice slightly. "She simply guessed. Pearls aren't exactly a rarity for the Queen Mother, are they?" Elizabeth remained silent, her gaze falling back to the photograph. She wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she asked, "And what about Marina?" George's voice. He spoke of Caithness, of the crash. That couldn't have been mere coincidence, could it? Philip sighed, rubbing his chin. "Not necessarily," he replied. "The Duke of Kent's plane crash isn't a secret. It was in the newspapers. People have speculated about it for years. Lillian could have known and used it to impress Marina and Alexandra. She didn't give any specifics. Nothing that couldn't be found in old reports. Just a mistake. I never meant to leave you." Poetic, moving, but hollow if you think about it. Elizabeth closed her eyes, her chest rising with a deep breath. She felt his words like a cold wind dissipate the warmth of that night. And yet, part of her still clung to hope. "Do you think she was lying?" she finally asked, opening her eyes and looking at him with concern. Philip leaned forward, his voice softer but no less resolute. "I looked into her, Lilibet, her past. She told everyone her father was a clergyman and her husband a mathematician. But I made inquiries through my contacts in London. Her father was a simple railway worker who died in poverty, and her husband was a clerk barely making ends meet. She even lied about her war medal. There was no OBE. If she so easily deceived others about her own life, why should we believe her spirits?" He paused, then added more quietly, "But I don't claim to know everything. Maybe she does feel something. I just want you to see both sides." Elizabeth nodded, her expression thoughtful. She recalled her father's voice, its hoarseness, its warmth. "You are stronger than you think." Those words had been like balm to her soul, and even now, under the weight of doubt, she couldn't bring herself to reject them. "You're right," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "Her lies are troubling, but Mother, did you see her eyes? She seemed alive again." Philip smiled, softly, almost tenderly. "I saw," he admitted, "and for that alone perhaps it was worth it. Your mother has found a peace she hasn't had since he left. If Lillian gave her that, truth or deception, I won't be the one to take it away from her." Elizabeth looked at him with gratitude. "Then we won't tell her," she decided. "Let her believe it was him. She even calls Lillian now, you know? Chats about trivial things, but I can hear the relief in her voice. I don't want that to vanish." Philip nodded, rising from his chair. "So be it," he said, stepping closer and placing a hand on her shoulder. "And you, Lilibet, believe, if you must. But don't forget to see the world through my eyes sometimes. It helps to keep your feet on the ground." She covered his hand with her own, offering a faint smile. "I'll try," she promised. "But those words, they will stay with me. Even if it was a lie, it was a beautiful one." Philip let out a quiet hum but said nothing more, only squeezing her shoulder a little tighter. They remained like that, watching the dying embers of the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. For Elizabeth, it was a battle between heart and reason, faith in her father against her husband's logic. For Philip, it was the struggle to protect her while leaving space for her hope. And beyond the palace walls, the mystery of Lillian Bailey, fraud or medium, dissolved into the night, leaving the answer to those who had heard the tale. This story is inspired by real events but includes elements of artistic fiction. Up next, you will see a list of historical facts that formed its foundation. If you enjoy experiencing history through storytelling, make sure to subscribe. Many more fascinating tales await.